with these waves, you can have your bow stuck in a 30-foot wave, and then 700 feet later, that's how long these things are, you can have your stern stuck in another 30-foot wave with nothing supporting that ship in between. So it's going to sag. Why is it going to sag? Because it's carrying 26,000 tons of iron ore. 26,000 tons of iron ore is the same as 4,200 adult elephants. Then it does what's called hogging over the next wave, which is kind of the opposite, draping itself over that wave. Then it sags, then it hogs, then it sags, then it hogs. This happens 10,000 times a day during a storm. Take a paperclip, bend it back and forth 10,000 times. What's going to happen? All right, that's what happens to these ships oftentimes. It does not happen on the ocean. It happens on the Great Lakes. So that's how you got 6,000 shipwrecks, 30,000 crew lost. That's one per day, every day for a century.
Legend lives on from the Chippewa down of the big lake they call Gitchagumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead till the skies of November turn gloomy. A load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. The good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early. All right. Welcome to a very special episode of the Growth Mixtape Podcast, and I'm your host, Bob Mathers. Today I talked to John Bacon, author of the 5-time New York Times bestseller, The Gales of November, the Untold Story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I can't even remember a time when I wasn't gripped by the story of the mighty Fitz, a 700-foot freighter loaded with iron ore that sank in the storm of the century in Lake Superior in 1975. And if it sounds familiar, it's only because Gordon Lightfoot wrote what is still today the definitive song of nautical disaster. And that song alone is the reason that of the 6,000 ships at the bottom of the Great Lakes, the Edmund Fitzgerald is the only one people know by name. Now, here's a fun story. I've been thinking lately about what makes a great podcast episode, and I've come down to two things. Is it interesting, and is it helpful? And I've been thinking about whether I should score each episode on a scale of 1 to 5. How interesting is it, and how helpful is it? And my goal would be to have a 5 out of 5 on both of those categories every episode. And I think I've come pretty close on a few of them. But I've also realized that sometimes you just need to do shit for the fun of it. And that's what this episode is. The story of the Edmund Fitzgerald has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. My dad and I would talk about it out fishing on the Great Lakes. We'd listen to Gordon Lightfoot. It's part of the fabric of my life. But here's the thing. You might not learn a damn thing in this conversation, at least nothing that's going to help you be a better person. But it also might be the most interesting episode I've ever done. So, I don't know, maybe there is a lesson. Maybe we just need to get more comfortable, give ourselves permission to chase our curiosity for no fucking reason. Not because it's going to make us money or help us be a better person, be a better dad, a better partner. Not because it's helping us push us out of our comfort zone. We just need to do it because it's interesting, not having any idea where it might lead. And damn, maybe that's the most important lesson of all. Because it occurs to me that this episode might just be the reason I created this podcast in the first place. Please enjoy John Bacon. John Bacon, welcome to the show. I can't tell you how excited I am about this. I've had this date circled on my calendar for weeks.
Well, you're very kind, Bob. And in fact, your enthusiasm got my wife's attention because she said, this guy is really looking forward to talking to you. Check him out. It's a great website, great program. So we appreciate it, and thanks for your invitation.
Well, yeah, I was scrolling through Instagram, and of course, the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald was maybe 3 weeks ago, and it'll be more weeks than that by the time people listen to this. But my feed was just filled with stories about it, and I came across your book, and I don't think I've ever reached out to a guest faster than I've reached out to you. I'm like, holy shit, I didn't realize people were still writing about this 50 years later. I can't wait. And you were just so gracious, and here we are. So this is awesome.
Well, I appreciate that. And then also, it's always good for me to reach the Canadian side of things as well, because we're doing well in Canada as well. I'm actually half Canadian. My mom is Canadian, so I'm half Canadian. Bacon is the joke. But that joke is not very fun in Canada because you guys call it pea meal. So, hey.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Canada because in preparation for this, I probably talked to 20 people, any people from
Wow.
18 years old to 70 years old. Just curious, what do you think of when I mentioned the Edmund Fitzgerald? And I got lots of different reactions to it. One of the things, though, is that everybody I talk to in Canada is shocked that it's not a Canadian story, right? It's a Canadian ship with it's American ship with American crewmen leaving an American port, going to an American port. It just happens to have sunk in Canadian waters and be sung and have a very famous song written about it by a Canadian songwriter.
Well, those are two pretty good Canadian things right there, of course, because let's be honest, without the song, there is no book. I mean, how about this stat for you, Bob? Between 1875 and 1975, there were 6,000 commercial shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. And by that, I mean not rowboats, but schooners and whatnot, tankers, you name it, all going down, just crazy stuff. And we all know one. And the answer is because of Gordon Lightfoot's great song. So he got it right. And crucially, it is in Canadian waters, the ship is today. And it was the Canadian government that approved the family's wishes to have the site declared an international grave site, and that was very gracious of them. That's not an easy process either, it turns out. So that is crucial to keep the grifters and the ghouls away from the shipwreck today.
Right. So that means that nobody's allowed to go down there without the consent of the Canadian government. And I think of the American government, too. Is that true?
Yeah, kind of, but it's only legally.
Right.
Only the Canadians really matter in this one. And they've been very gracious about this. Countless meetings, by the way. The families would go to Ottawa or Toronto and have these meetings, of course, and they've handled it very well. And since then, no one's been down since. So it has worked.
So getting back to the book quickly, what is it? So the book is called The Gales of November, The Untold Story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. You've written a bunch of books. What makes you look at this story and believe that you had something new to offer after 50 years?
That's a great question. Of the 14 previous books, by the way, one of them is called The Greatest Comeback, about the Summit Series, 1972, published only in Canada, by the way, HarperCollins Canada. So how about that? That was a real treat. I grew up almost on the Canadian border in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So in 72, I was a third grader running home from school with my friend Scott Childs, who's from Owen Sound, Ontario, to turn on Channel 9 out of Windsor. How about that? CKLW. I would get CBC that way, and we were watching the games, of course, at 2:30 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So anyway, some Canadian roots there. Another book is on Cirque du Soleil, actually. So I've got a few roots there. But this book, you're all right. I mean, behind me is a bookshelf full of, 15, 20 or more books written on the Edmund Fitzgerald. Almost all of them are regionally produced. None of them are from New York, basically. And second of all, they're almost all focused on one thing: what happened, how did it go down? So the whodunit. For me, the untold part was getting to 14 of the 29 families of the crew members. There are 29 crew members on that ship that day, and they talked to an author for the first time, which was very much flattering and an honor. But we respected that. Got to 6 crewmen who had been on the ship, obviously before it went down. 2 from that season, actually, who knew the crew, knew the captain, knew the ship. So we get basically as close as we can get to an eyewitness there. And finally, Rick Barthuli of the Arthur Anderson. That's the ship that was chasing the Edmund Fitzgerald that night. He is probably the last surviving member of the Anderson crew from that night, November 10th, 1975. That's as close as you can get to an eyewitness from that evening, what it's like to be in those ships at that point. So there's the untold part, I think. We also do get into new information on why it happened, how it happened, and so on. But the real untold part here is the people. That's what I wanted to get to.
Yeah, that struck me as I was going through it. I didn't realize that. It was a bit of a tribute to many of the stories that seem to have gotten lost for those 29 people right, because like you said, the dozens of books that have been written, I don't remember ever hearing any stories about the people that, the 29 souls we lost that day. And so it's really beautiful. So much so, when we get to the part, of course, where the ship is sinking, and even more so when you describe how the families are finding out, like I was in tears and I wasn't expecting that because I had just, you put us in their homes as they're finding out. I got the feeling that I knew all of them. Yeah, it was really emotional. I did not see that coming.
The rule of thumb I have in these, I hate to say it, disaster books, is that you have to care about the people before the disaster happens. So you have to build up who they are, explain who they are, get to know them. Because by the time it happens, it's kind of too late. So that, I thought, functioned well in Halifax, and then here the same thing. Get to know half the guys, at least, on the crew before it all happens. And trust me when I tell you, I got choked up many times talking to these people. They're talking for the first time about their fathers and uncles and cousins and boyfriends in some cases. And as one of them told me, you don't get over this, you get used to it. If you lose your dad when you're a 12-year-old girl, that's not going to not sting when you're 62. In some ways, it makes it worse, all the years you lost, naturally. But you do learn how to handle it. That's undeniably true.
Why does this story mean so much to you? I mean, part of it is probably growing up in Michigan, but what was it about the story that compelled you to dig into it like this?
You know what? I've done many of these interviews, and no one's ever asked me that. It's interesting. I grew up in Michigan. That's certainly part of it. And I grew up on the Great Lakes. I've been in all 5 of the Great Lakes. I've sailed the Port Huron to Mackinac race for a story. It's about a 3-day race. And for a year at the Detroit News, I traveled the state of Michigan to do offbeat stories. Well, half of those end up on the Great Lakes. You can't avoid it. That's what the farms are great. We need them. They tend not to produce, fabulous stories. The water does. So I can't spin that. But for me, it was the people. It was the song, undeniably. That when you grow up as I did on the Great Lakes, that song is always in your head when you look out across the lakes. And honestly, it's just fervent curiosity. Who were these guys? What were their jobs like? What's it like to be on the ship? What is shipping like? I really didn't know almost anything about it. Sad to say. I asked my wife. The Summit Series book took me about a year and a half, for example, talking to Bobby Orr and Bobby Clark and Ken Dryden and so on. And most of my books take me about a year and change. And this book took me about 3.5 years. And I was asking my wife, why is this taking me so long? And she said, oh, that's easy, because you didn't know anything. And I thought I did, but I didn't. I was just really very curious as to what their lives are like. What's it like on board? What's it like on shore? What's it like for the families when you're home and you're waiting 9 months for your dad to get off a ship? That's got to be pretty incredible. So, and also shipping itself. I mean, I knew it was important. I grew up here, but I had no idea how important. Shipping, by the way, is 3 times more efficient than trains and 6 times more efficient than trucks. Not 6% or 60%, but 600% more efficient than trucks. So whatever you can put on a ship, you do. So as a result, if you live in Canada, the United States, or really almost anywhere in the world, the cement in your basement, the car in your driveway, and the food on your table comes from these ships. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and like 95% of the iron that was going into the cars in Detroit came from Minnesota, or came from where the Edmund Fitzgerald and all those ships were starting from.
Exactly right. It's called the Iron Range, excuse me, and that's where they produce a lot of great hockey players, by the way. About a third of the Miracle on Ice hockey team comes from the Iron Range. These are tough dudes. And it goes across northern Wisconsin and Michigan's Upper Peninsula, which Canadians tend to know about. But yeah, I mean, almost all the iron that we use in the United States comes from this area, and still does. So it's pretty amazing. Without this, by the way, we're cooked.
Right.
And to prove the point, during World War II, they put 7,000 soldiers in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, at the Sioux Locks, because that is the bottleneck that covers the 21-foot drop between Lake Superior and Lake Huron. And the Arsenal of Democracy you've probably heard about, that's where we're building one B-24 Liberator bomber per hour, every hour, 24 hours a day, no shifts off for 3 years. That's Rosie the Riveter and all that. All that depends on the iron coming from Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan down to Detroit, Cleveland, and so on. So that's why they put these troops there. That was the single most guarded point in all of North America during World War II. So if that fails, we're screwed.
Yeah. We lose the war if they bomb
we
the
lose the
Sioux
war.
Locks. Yeah.
Yes.
So you mentioned the song. It's interesting. I was thinking about, well, I definitely want to talk about the song a bit, but I'll leave it till later. But you're right. This book doesn't happen. This conversation doesn't happen. The one thing that is common among all those 20 people that I talked to in preparation for this, not only were the Canadians shocked that it wasn't a Canadian story, everyone says, "Oh, you mean the song?" So
Right.
what did you learn about the song that was surprising? You think people would want to hear about?
Well, quite a bit. First of all, in short, Gordon Lightfoot to me is one of the heroes of this story. So again, 6,000 shipwrecks. Everyone knows one of them, and it's this one because of Gordon Lightfoot. He was an avid sailor and a very good one, by the way. He had done the Port Huron to Mackinac race. I think he might have won it. I have to check my records on that. That night he was doing the story on November 10th, Monday night, November 10th, 1975, is the night that the ship went down. He was working on an Irish sea shanty he had learned when he was 3.5 years old, his first musical memory. He had no words, of course, at this point. At 10 o'clock at night, he goes down from his attic to his little kitchen to pour some coffee. And he thinks to himself at that time, with the wind blowing in Toronto, and I pronounce that the Canadian way, by the way. It's Tronno, Toronto, not Toronto, as right. Americans pronounce it. So I'm on to you, Bob. I'm on to you.
Very good.
The wind is whistling, and he says, "Man, it must be hell on Superior tonight." He already felt connected to these guys. That's why I think this song works. He took it seriously. He read almost every article he could get on it. It's 97% accurate, the song is. And he went to pains for that. But he did not want to record the song when he did. So they get to the studio in March in Toronto. And they've got 5 days to record 11 songs, and this is not one of them. He says it's not ready. He's not played it for anybody yet. So they finished the album, though, in 3.5 days. They're very efficient, and they've got a day and a half left. And he tells the guys, "Hey, congratulations. Good album. Thank you very much. This is the album Summertime Dreams." They are literally packing up their instruments when the producer gets on the PA and says, "Why don't you try that song you've been screwing around with?" And he says, "It's not ready. It's not ready." And they say, "Look, man, I'm charging for 5 days, whether you use 5 days or not. I'm here. The band's here. Why not try it?" And he says, "Okay, I'll give it a go." He gets talked into it. He asks for the lights to come down. It's almost dark. He's getting in the mood. He's quiet for about a minute. And then Barry Keane, who still lives in Toronto, 24-year-old drummer back then, great help on this book, by the way. I kept on getting lucky that my sources were still around, still sharp, able to talk, and so on. And Barry Keane was just phenomenal. He says, "What do you want me to do?" He's never heard the song. He has no idea if it even has drums. And Lightfoot says, "I'll give you a nod when I want you to come in." And he said, "Okay." So Lightfoot goes for a minute and a half without nodding to Barry Keane. And Barry Keane thinks, well, he's forgotten all about me. This song's about to end. But nope, at 1:34 exactly, and I've timed this, by the way, he turns over to Barry Keane and gives him a nod. And Barry Keane comes in with what we now know to be the Storm, just a wonderful drum fill that you cannot hear the song without it. It's not a background part. It's front and center. And they keep on going along. And they finish in 6 minutes, 28 seconds. Super long song, 3 times longer than the average song. And they said, "You know what? That wasn't half bad. Let's try it again. Let's record this one." They tried it again and again and again that day. Not as good. They tried it again the next day about 5-10 times. Still not as good. And that's when the producer tells them, "You know what? I recorded the first time you guys were screwing around with it. Let's try it." They played it back, and they all agreed that was the best version. So as Barry Keane tells me, Barry Keane, by the way, is the most recorded musician in Canadian history. He's been on more than 500 albums, for crying out loud. So Shania Twain, Anne Murray, Bachman Turner Overdrive, you name it, he's been on it. And he said, "You know what? A first take happens once in a blue moon. I can probably count on 2 hands the times I've seen that. This is not a first take. This was the first time we ever played the song." And how often does that happen? He goes, "Never, ever, never, ever, ever." And I said, "Okay, why this one?" He said, "Because this is not a song that you think your way through. This is your song you have to feel. And if you feel it most strongly, the listener's going to pick up on that, and that's why we used the first one. And that's why, to this day, the version you hear on the radio is the first time anybody ever played the song, which is incredible."
Yeah, it's so rare that most of the time it's not even recorded. Like you said, most of the time the engineer wouldn't even bother to record it because we're gonna play this thing a few times before we press record. And you got to believe that there's just it's almost almost like the weight of the responsibility that they all felt by telling this story kind of came through in that they were not able to recapture in the 20 or 30 times they played it after that.
Bob, you are good. Yeah, I mean, you're bringing a lot of feeling to this interview. I appreciate that, and that's exactly right. They felt it, and that's why we feel it now. The families, by the way, at first, most of them liked it right away. A few were uncertain where he's coming from. Who's Gordon? I mean, they know who Gordon Lightfoot is, but why is he doing this? Is it exploiting and so on? But then he got to know the families, brought them backstage, wherever he's playing for decades. He'd bring them backstage, know their names, keep in touch. On their deathbeds, he's the guy giving you a call, amazingly. And he set up 2 scholarships in their names at the Great Lakes Maritime Academy in Traverse City, Michigan. And a couple times he had the lyrics wrong. He changed the lyrics in performance, not in the recording, but in performance. That's how dedicated he was to it. So they loved him, and they got to know him very well. And how about this? A very Canadian response, as Barry Keane says in the book. They go on tours and say, why don't you play Carefree Highway? Everyone likes that song. Oh, they all know that one. I don't want them to think I'm just out to make money. It's like, what is a concert? A concert is where you play your favorite songs because they will pay you money for them. And he is very humble about it, very Canadian. He was very careful not to exploit the families or the song. When Jimmy Fallon, the night show host in L.A., when he asked him to come on to do something silly about the Edmund Fitzgerald, it was a flat no. He just would not do it. So I think that the Canadian spirit that we're talking about here, which I'm familiar with, again, with a Canadian mom, is kind of throughout this thing. It's honest, it's sincere, it's pure. It is not about $1. And it was very much an unexpected hit. They were on the midnight concert show called the Midnight Special on Friday nights in the U.S., and you guys probably got it too. And he's allowed to play 6 songs off the album, and he only has 11 songs. And he did not play this one. And he's on Saturday Night Live after that, 3 or 4 songs. He does not play this one. It's too long. It's not commercial. It doesn't have a hook. It doesn't have a chorus. It doesn't have a guitar solo. Any of the things that are normally associated with a big hit. And it's 6.5 minutes long, for crying out loud. But it starts crawling up the charts, bit by bit by bit. And finally, it's number 2 in the United States, number 1 in Canada. And it's number 2 in the United States behind Rod Stewart's Tonight's the Night. That's with his Swedish model girlfriend, Britt Ekland, cooing in the background. That, kids, was the 70s, trust me. and this song, which is just the exact opposite, is right there. And I'm sure it's played more now than Rod Stewart ever is anymore. So this song spiked again last month on Billboard, number 1. It's still being played.
I didn't know it was number 2 to Tonight's the Night. That is, that's Rod Stewart's Spread Your Wings and Let Me Come Inside. Like, that is the epitome of like 70s schmaltz disc, kind of verging on disco cheese right there.
That is exactly right. I'm kind of surprised that line got through, but whatever.
Yeah, me too.
It's not my job.
Okay, I've got so many questions about, the storm and the ship. But first, what I loved... There's another song attached to this story, which I absolutely loved. Tell me a bit about Brandy.
Brandy, you're a fine girl. What a good wife you would be. But my life, my love, and my lady is the sea. And if you know the 70s at all, you know that song. That was number 1 in 1971 by a guy named Elliot Lurie. And that was his only one-hit wonder, but he's made a great career in L.A. Doing soundtracks, actually, for the movies that we all watch. And he has a song, and it becomes a big hit. He can't believe it. He's very shocked. He didn't think it was going to be. And all the sailors, by the way, this is the anthem to this day. On the Great Lakes, going to any sailor bar, this song, I guarantee you, is on the jukebox. And I played it in a few of the great bars around the Great Lakes that these guys were in. And they love it. And as John Hayes said, one of my sources, his best man, Tom Benson, was on the ship. They're classmates together at the Great Lakes Maritime Academy. He says that that was our anthem, basically. That was who we were. So it was pretty cool. Now, here's how it works. All the sailor bars on the Great Lakes have a few things in common. 1, cheap beer. That's one thing. 2, a great jukebox, especially back then. 65 to 75, that's just incredible music, obviously, to me. Third thing is, it's got to be within walking distance of the dock. Because you walk up the street. Not up the road, up the street. When I said up the road, my guys corrected me. So it's up the street. usually within a quarter mile. You don't have much time as the ship loads or unloads. If the old guys got there first, they're playing country music, Johnny Cash, Charlie Pride, and so on. The young guys got there first. It's the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and Motown and whatnot. But the one song they would agree on is Brandy, You're a Fine Girl. And they would literally sing in unison in the bars when the song came on. Pretty cool. So my wife and I were debating. I knew I had to buy the rights for the Edmund Fitzgerald. There's no way I can. It's the title of the book, The Gales of November. I mean, okay, I'm in on that one. And that comes out of the author's pocket, actually. We were debating Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, but I thought it's such an essential part of their lives, their stories. And it reflected them so well that I got the rights to that, too, for this book. But fun fact, all the sailors I talked to said, man, that guy must be a sailor because he knows our life. He got it exactly right. And I interviewed Elliot Lurie for this book. And he says, I hate to tell you, the only ship I've ever been on was the Staten Island ferry.
Yeah. Well, what I loved about that part of the story, John, is that to me, that song is, again, just yacht rock schmaltz. I can't imagine these rugged sailors been at sea for days, drinking beer, arm in arm, whether they're 19 years old or 60 years old. They're singing this cheesy one-hit wonder. There's something just beautiful about that.
I agree. I don't think it's cheesy myself, but that's a matter of taste. Obviously, I love this song. But yes, and these guys, I would not describe stoic Midwesterner sailors as altogether romantic, but it is a romantic song. And it speaks to kind of their loneliness at sea. And they lived it, of course. So that part, the music, I was shameless, I admit, in dropping songs left and right in this book, because it gets in your head and you kind of hum along. Few things establish an era like that, like the music in your head. And if we ever do a movie out of this thing, and that's possible, I guarantee you it will have one hell of a soundtrack.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that I hadn't realized either, you mentioned it earlier, 9 months. So these guys get on a ship in March, I guess, March to November. And there's no vacation, there's no days off, there's no weekends, and they're either loading the ship at sea, so to speak, unloading the ship. Like that's all they do for 9 months. And so the ship comes in, they walk up the street to the bar, they basically drink as many beers as they can in the time that they have. They turn around, they get back on the ship for 9 months. They're home for 3 months a year.
That is exactly right. And I had no idea about this lifestyle. It's as I said earlier, it's an industry we completely depend on, but it's almost entirely invisible to us. As one of my experts said, we know the farmer, the fisherman, the factory worker, the miner, but nobody knows the sailor. And I was wondering, why is that? And I thought, well, there are only 30 guys in a ship. Now it's co-ed. 30 people in a ship. There were only 300 ships back then, now about 100 ships. Well, that's 9,000 people spread out over, 8 states and the gigantic province of Ontario. So you're not going to meet them, chances are. And even if they're living next door, you're still not going to meet them because that guy's on a ship 9 months out of the year. Just like you said, now you have shifts and breaks and so on, union contracts. But back then, man, no anniversaries, graduations, birthdays, any of that. You're on a ship 9 months straight, usually March till January or so. This ship was going to be finished in November due to repairs. But think about that. That means, as one of my guys said, I've got 3 kids. I'm very close to them. I didn't teach any of them how to throw a baseball or ride a bike. And that's got to break your heart on some level. And same guy, John Hayes, said that nothing's better at the end of the season than to come home, put a fire in the fireplace, get my favorite drink, turn the game on, sit in my favorite chair, which is not moving for once, unlike a ship. And your kids run up to you and they give you a hug and they say, Daddy, Daddy. Then they say, you smell like a truck. And he says, no, I smell like a paycheck. That's what it takes, kids.
And those 29 guys, they had been gone for 9 months and they were 2 days away, right, from coming home.
Yep. So heartbreaking.
Yeah.
This was not only going to be the last run of the season, it turned out, and I was able to prove that, but the last run of Ernest McSorley, the captain's career. He was about to retire, but before the start of the season, he said to his wife, Nellie, also 63, in Toledo, Ohio, I promise you, it's my last year. And 5 other guys made the same promise to their wives. Going to be better husbands, better grandparents than they were parents. This is their chance. This is a payback they got for this very hard lifestyle. It was 20 or 30 years being home, basically. And they're supposed to stop the week before, but they didn't. They added one more trip because McSorley needed the bonus to pay for his wife's medical care. She was probably with cancer. She was in 24-hour care at that point, and she did live another 20-some years. But that was for her, so it makes it all the more heartbreaking. He was going to retire. Guy named Eddie Bindon, 47 years old. He was about to retire. His wife, Helen, in the Cleveland area, she'd be waiting at the dock, just like McSorley's family is going to be waiting at the dock. Pretty incredible. And then the day before they leave, he goes to Duluth, Minnesota to buy his wife a 2-carat diamond ring for their 25th anniversary. And instead of packing that in his duffel bag, Bob, like you normally would, you're going to see her in 3 days in Toledo. I mean, she's going to be right there. He gives it to a friend of his in Duluth, and with a love note wrapped around it, and says, please send this to my wife. And only Eddie Bindon knows why he did that. Why would you do that? But sure enough, of course, the ship goes down, and 3 days later, she gets this ring in the mail. She wears it the rest of her life, and she never remarried. So these are the kind of stories that I kept on uncovering as I got to know these people better and better.
Hey, it's Bob, and I'm taking the Growth Mixtape on the road in a series of live podcast episodes. Imagine a podcast tailored specifically for your company, recorded in front of a live audience that would be released as its own episode. These are thoughtful, emotional conversations that help teams who have lost their spark rediscover their curiosity and creativity so they can love work again. Sure, you could do a typical keynote or panel discussion, or you could give your team something they'll never forget. Book me at your next event at bobmathers.ca. Now back to the show. Well, I want to come back to a couple more of those stories later, John. There's a few things that were kind of nightmare fuel as you go through the account of what happened and the size of the storm. And so maybe if we could take us back there, what is it about the Great Lakes or even Lake Superior in particular that makes the storms and this storm just so incredibly powerful? Because, and you mentioned it earlier, all these books about like what happened, who's to blame, right? We need somebody to hang this on. And of course, it's like a plane crash, any number of things. There's no one thing that is to blame, but just the unique characteristics of the storm and the lake in itself just make it like you just paint a picture of what the crew is up against.
Well, I appreciate that. And listeners, be known that Bob does his homework, man. Because you clearly read it very carefully. I was shocked by a lot of things when I did my research here. One, I knew how big the Great Lakes were, but I didn't really know how big they were. Lake Superior is bigger than Ireland. That got my attention. And of course, the 5 combined are bigger than all of New England in the United States, plus the state of New York. That's how big this is, but Canadians probably know that. But I was also stunned to learn from experienced veteran commercial sailors, and by that I don't mean wind sailors, but the guys with the cargo, that the guys that sailed on the Atlantic versus the Great Lakes told me consistently and emphatically that the Great Lakes are more dangerous than the Atlantic. And I had to hear it 10 times and read more before I actually believed it, but it's true. And the reason is salt water is one reason. It takes our sharp, pointy waves on the Great Lakes, fresh water. On the ocean, the salt weighs down that point, kind of sands it off, and spreads out the waves as well. Furthermore, more importantly, you've got the storms on the oceans are 500 miles, 1,000 miles away. So by the time the waves actually get to you, they're like smooth roller coasters, still dangerous and still can make you sick, of course, but not nearly as dangerous as the ones in the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes are produced by what's called locally occurring storms. And I asked one of my experts, what does that mean? He said, it's right over your damn head. And if you've been on Lake Ontario, of course, in Toronto, you can be fishing that morning, and by lunchtime, you are looking for a shelter. It can get nasty fast. That's the Great Lakes. So with these waves, You can have your bow stuck in a 30-foot wave, and then 700 feet later, that's how long these things are, you can have your stern stuck in another 30-foot wave with nothing supporting that ship in between. So it's going to sag. Why is it going to sag? Because it's carrying 26,000 tons of iron ore. 26,000 tons of iron ore is the same as 4,200 adult elephants. A crazy amount. The scale of all this is just mind-blowing. They carried enough taconite, which is iron ore, on each run on the Edmund Fitzgerald to build 7,000 cars per run. And they do this every 5 days. So that's how the big three automakers were cranking them out during this time. So what happens is, therefore, the ship sags in the middle when it's not supported between two waves. Then it does what's called hogging over the next wave, which is kind of the opposite, draping itself over that wave. Then it sags, then it hogs, then it sags, then it hogs. This happens 10,000 times a day during a storm. Take a paperclip, bend it back and forth 10,000 times. What's going to happen? All right, that's what happens to these ships oftentimes. It does not happen on the ocean. It happens on the Great Lakes. So that's how you got 6,000 shipwrecks, 30,000 crew lost. That's one per day, every day for a century. Just crazy numbers. So already you have a scary situation. It's always at its worst in November, the gales of November. Why? Because the water's warm and the air is cold, just like hurricane season in Florida in September. The water wants to come up, like boiling water bubbles and steams away in your kitchen. Same phenomenon. The warm stuff wants to go where the cold stuff is. So that's a problem. On top of that, how about this one, Bob? The longer winter it takes to arrive, the nastier it shows up. And we all know about that here in the Great Lakes. So when it's 70 degrees in Duluth on Sunday, November 9th, that is not good news. It's like water behind a dam. The more water you have behind a dam, the worse it's going to be when it finally breaks. The longer winter comes, the nastier it's going to be. And you get two storms coming in. One is the Alberta Clipper from, of course, Alberta. I think you know where that is. Bringing cold, dry winds. They're used to that. That's pretty common. One they were not used to is called the Panhandle Hooker, a term I did not have when I wrote the book. It's not what you think. It's from, it hooks around the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas and comes on up with hot, wet winds. All right, and that contrast is going to be bad. These two storms collide right in front of Whitefish Bay like a catcher guarding home plate. Whitefish Bay, by the way, is the drain of the bathtub that is Lake Superior. So you start in Duluth and you end up in Whitefish Bay, and that's where all the trouble is, of course, and this storm is going to block you from getting there. So all this is happening at once. It's the storm of the century. By the time the ship gets down to where it needs to be to get to Whitefish Bay, 17 miles away from safety, and a 300 and about a 400-mile trip, basically. That's how close they were. As one of my experts said, the Edmund Fitzgerald, and only the Edmund Fitzgerald, because the next ship was about an hour behind, 15 miles north, was in the exact wrong place at the exact wrong time. 100-mile-per-hour winds, that's hurricane force anywhere in the world. 60-foot waves, and this thing only has 11 feet out of the water. So do that every 4 to 8 seconds, and you see the problem.
Yeah, 60-foot waves, and you mentioned that 11-foot freeboard. So that's the distance when this thing is fully loaded, the distance between the water and the top of the deck. And these waves are, I think you call it green water, right? They're not just splashing over the ship. They're like swallowing the ship.
That's, man, Bob, damn it, that's a good line. And if I had that line a year ago, I would have said swallowing the ship. It's what happens. The splashy waves, okay, those are scary, those are bad, but they're used to that. Green waves, green water, that means you are basically underwater. And the light of the ship lights that water up, of course, makes it green. That is scary stuff. That means you're underwater. So you're underwater 20, 30 feet every 4 to 8 seconds. These things are very well designed, and it comes back up, it comes back up, it comes back up. But after some point, around 7:10 p.m. on November 10th, it did not come up. We know that.
So I wanted to ask you about that. That's a great segue. You've done all this research. I know you've read all those books behind you about the whodunit. So the ship goes down right around 7:10 or 7:15 in the evening. So what's your best guess about what was happening at 7:05?
That's a great question. Of course, like I said, the books are behind me, but we did advance the conversation in many ways here. One is that the I'm going to go first with John Tanner. John Tanner, one of my experts, he said that when a big ship goes down, it is rarely one thing, as you alluded to earlier, Bob. It's a series of forces that combine nature, how the ship was built, other stuff that all combine to send the ship down. It's rarely one thing. In this case, this was the storm of the century. We know that. There's one thing. Two, this ship was built swapping out rivets for welds. It was considered innovative at the time. Welds are cheaper, they're faster to make. They're also lighter, 1.2 million pounds lighter. And what that allows you to do, therefore, is load 1.2 million more pounds of taconite, iron ore, each time you make a run. Well, that's 50 runs per year. That's 60 million extra pounds of taconite you're taking right there, times every year you're out there, of course. So that is a huge profit you get by making it lighter. But welds are not as strong as rivets. It makes it far more flexible, far more bendy, which can be good to a point, like a skyscraper in the wind, but you can bend too much. When you bend too much, you crack. So that's one aspect there. That night, as they're going down on the far end, his long radar is out, his short radar is out, the lighthouse at Whitefish Point, the light is out, the radio beacon from that lighthouse is also out. That is a signal that goes out to captains to tell you where you are and where you're trying to go. So he's truly sailing blind. At that point, he might have gone over a little patch called 6 Fathoms Shoal. It's attached to an island called Caribou Island. It's in Canada. I don't know why they call it Caribou Island. It's a nasty little swamp of flies and nastiness. Even the caribou have long left, Bob. They swam across to Batchewana Bay or somewhere in Canada, but they're gone. But 6 Fathoms Shoal is right in front of it as you go down. A fathom is 6 feet. 6 fathoms, therefore, is 36 feet. So you don't want to be anywhere near this in a lake that's 1,000 foot deep. And in some places, it's only 11 feet deep and just crazy. So he might have gone over that. If he did, because he didn't know where he was, basically, and they bottomed out, that would explain why they're taking on water. It would explain why they develop what's called a starboard list. That means you are leaning permanently to the right, and that gets worse over time, which means you can't steer nearly as well. It's much harder to steer. You're more vulnerable to getting pinned down by a wave or even capsizing. You're like a three-legged animal in the wild. You are now at the mercy of waves you don't control. So all this starts adding up, by the way. And by the way, one more fun fact for you. The map they're using, they call them charts. We call them maps. The chart they're using is from a 1973 U.S. Geological Survey, it says, on the map. Okay, great. Then you look more closely and it says this is derived from the Canadian map. So you look at the Canadian map because it's their water, and it says 1973 Geological Survey. This data is derived from a survey from 1919. So the data they had was 55 years old, and it turns out 6 Fathoms Shoal had moved about a mile. So he had a lot of problems going in. If he hit then, that would probably explain all the problems they have afterwards. And we do know at 7:10, right around there, he's talking to Bernie Cooper, the captain of the Arthur Anderson, and they are now talking about the various problems they're both having. And Bernie asks him, well, how are you making out with the problems, with your problems? And McSorley says, and I quote, "We are holding our own." And those are the last words we know of from the Edmund Fitzgerald. And shortly thereafter, it went out of sight, off the radar, almost certainly sank at that time. We don't know exactly why, although I've got my theories certainly. But we do know that when the end happened, it probably happened incredibly fast because McSorley, considered the greatest captain on the Great Lakes out of 300, he did not get out an SOS. The lifeboats were still secure. Only one crew we know of was wearing a life jacket. They did not think they're going to go down at that moment. So that gives the families some solace that it was quick and fast at the end.
There is some comfort in knowing that maybe these guys, I mean, you have to be a little bit crazy to do this for a living. So you have to be an optimist. You never really believe that a ship like the Edmund Fitzgerald is going to sink, no matter how badly you're getting the shit kicked out of you for 12 or 15 hours. So we take some comfort in thinking, yeah, maybe these guys didn't know what was happening. But then you talk about the winches and the cables and the fact that the ship might have been actually cracking in half during this. Can you talk a little bit about, because that is nightmare fuel, that these guys would actually know what was happening and the peril that they were in.
That is undeniably true. And again, you read it very carefully. A lot of more untold part. One, as far as the ship hitting on the 6 Fathom Shoal, a guy named Dick Race, the all-time best, they said, diving investigator on the Great Lakes, was hired by the company, Ogilvy Norton, to quietly go out there a few months later, March of 76, to investigate 6 Fathom Shoal to see if there's any evidence of hitting. And he wrote a report. The report went to Cleveland, where the company is based. And a guy I know, Peter Groh, a guy I met in this process, his job when the company went bankrupt in 2004 was to go through hundreds of bankers' boxes, maybe thousands, of all their other ships. They had a lot of ships and a lot of documents, of course. And they found everything, pay scales, crew and everything else on all the ships, except for 3 boxes, all on the Edmund Fitzgerald. None of them signed out by anybody, and all disappeared. I'm willing to bet this report is in that file somewhere. But anyway, so that, what's in the report, I can't say because I've not seen it and I've tried very hard to find it. But he did tell 4 people I know, experts now in this book, the same thing. And that is that I found the Edmund Fitzgerald's red paint on the bottom of 6 Fathom Shoal, which is as close as we can get to proof. Is it 100%? I can't call it that. But boy, it's highly suggestive, I'll say that. Likewise, on the bottom, they've done a few dives before it was declared a gravesite in 95. And they found at one point there's 120 feet of 1-inch thick steel cable pulled out, spooled out from one of the winches. Winches, sorry. And what does that mean? It's like, I have no idea what that means. I'm not a sailor. Talking to Tom Wyatter, a captain of the Great Lakes, he said, these winches do not let out this cable by accident. And I've played around with these things in other ships, and he's right. There's lock, stock, and barrel. It does not roll for anything unless you intentionally unleash it. So somebody did that intentionally. Why would you have 120 feet of cable out in that situation, and you already are on top of it? These deadheads, these look like little fire hydrants, basically, throughout the ship. They're for tying up when you're on the dock. You could take that cable and tie up the 2 halves of the ship and to keep it from splitting. That's what happened to the Bradley in 1958, the Morel in 1966. Like I said earlier, these ships can crack in half, and we have witnesses on this. So they might have been trying to tie the ship together when it was already cracking. And in fact, there's a recording of Ernest McSorley yelling at guys, don't let nobody on the deck. This guy's not a yeller or screamer. Why is anybody on the deck in 30-foot waves with ice and rain, and the fence railings are off? This is extremely dangerous. In one wave and you're gone, basically. That could be why. So that does suggest that these guys knew the ship was cracking beforehand, didn't think it was going to. And like you said, you hit another crucial point, confirmation bias. These guys have always made it, and therefore you think you can't not make it. Until you're in a car accident, you never think you're going to be in a car accident. You just can't believe that's going to happen. So that's what these guys were dealing with. They always made it, and therefore we're going to make it this time too.
Yeah, that image of crewmen being out in those conditions and the possibility of trying to put these cables and hold this ship together while it's cracking in half in 50, 60-foot waves. Like, I wonder, that's one of the images that is sort of burned into my brain. I'm wondering if you've got images that haunt you, either with conversations or just as you put together the pieces of this puzzle.
The image I've got is the one of the families almost all had nightmares about this after the fact. One, Deb Champeau, her dad was Buck Champeau, one of the engineers on the ship, very good at what he did. She's the only child, definitely daddy's girl. She's a 16-year-old girl at the time. She'd always have nightmares of her dad in the water with his hand above the water looking for her, trying to find her, and she could not help him. Another one was Tom Walton, his uncle. Grant Walton was on the ship. His dad had been on the ship before. He had been in the ship before as a porter, a sailing family. He always had nightmares. His uncle must have been in the engine room at the time. It was his shift, 4 to 8. So if you're in that area and now you're going down, these are tight quarters usually, You're going down, the lights are out, and it's filling with frigid water very quickly, and you're going to hit the bottom at 35 miles per hour. He said, I had nightmares about that for years because that almost certainly is how his life ended, basically. So those are the ones that stay with me, frankly, and what that must have been like. And you already mentioned one, the third one. If they were on deck, it would have been the guys I got to know the best. Bruce Hudson, Mark Thomas, his buddy. These guys were going to go on a road trip. And Bruce Hudson's hotshot, burgundy red, same color as the ship, really. 1972 Dodge Challenger. This is the muscle car era. That car is waiting for them in Toledo 2 days later. And they got money, man. These jobs paid quite well, like 3 or 4 times what a teacher got paid even back then. They're going to go for a month to Colorado to get some Coors beer, because back then, Bob, that was exotic. Now we know it as watered down Kool-Aid, but anyway. And it's not Canadian beer, man. We know that. Go to LA, come back along Route 66. They had the whole thing planned out. Those would be the guys who'd be on deck. And that must have been utterly terrifying. The fence railing is down, might not help you anyway. So if you slip, you're going right across, and there's no saving you at that point. Also, by the way, even if you had on a life jacket, you got about 10 or 15 minutes in those waters before you die anyway, hypothermia and whatnot. So those 3 images right there stay with me.
Yes, and one of the others that really stuck with me too is because you take us back to the Monday night, and these families, these families and daughters and wives and girlfriends.
Wives, the sons and the daughters.
Yeah, there you go. They're watching Monday Night Football, right? Tell me about how they're finding out about the ship.
It's kind of funny about that. I just did a thing for CNN about the decade of sports in the 70s and what a big deal Monday Night Football was. It started in 1970, considered an oddity. Back then, you could only watch day games on Sunday, pretty much. But Monday Night Football took off, of course. It was such a big deal that every single person I talked to about Monday, November 10th, 1975, was watching the Monday Night Football game. It was the Chiefs and the Cowboys, I think. They're watching this game, and that was the families at home in Duluth, in Mauquaw, Wisconsin, in Toledo, Ohio, in Cleveland, the Coast Guards in Duluth. The Coasties were all there. They were 1 day off. They got in the day before. They had a day to themselves to eat pizza and drink beer and watch this game. Everybody was watching this game. And then this is where the company, there aren't too many villains in the story, but the company is not a hero. They did not, when the families started hearing this on Channel 10 from Dennis Anderson out of Duluth, Channel 11 in Toledo, Ohio, they got it on TV. Your neighbor would be watching TV and knock on the door and tell you that your dad's ship had just gone down. Imagine that. I mean, you're a 12-year-old girl. It's like, holy mackerel, this is crazy. So they all started calling the company, and the company did not answer a single call that night. They did not return any calls. They didn't call anybody themselves. So these people find out from TV. Ruth Hudson, she's one of my favorite people in this story. She passed away 10 years ago. She was 4'9", and she told you she's 5'5", and you believed her, apparently. She's a little spark plug in Cleveland. Her only child, Bruce Hudson, is the deckhand I mentioned earlier with the muscle car and so on. She finds out while she's driving to her job at Bonnie Bell Cosmetics in Cleveland the next day on the radio that her son's ship is gone. Imagine that. I mean, that's just so cruel. So that's when they find out, but it's Monday Night Football that they all had in common. What was convenient about that for me as a writer is wherever they were in the country, they were all watching Monday Night Football. It's like the one thing that kind of connected all scenes at once. So that, for me, was a good device to use. But yes, it was just horrible how they found out.
Yeah, that just, imagine everybody sitting around the TV watching the Cowboys and the Chiefs, and maybe seeing that little ticker along the bottom of the screen or something.
That's what it was.
Yeah, the Edmund Fitzgerald is missing. And there's probably some disbelief. Again, there's got to be some confirmation bias of these families, too. It's like, oh, well, sure, it's missing. Its radar is out. It's lost radio contact. I'm sure it'll be fine, right? And slowly over the coming hours and weeks or coming days, it becomes, obvious what happened. Now, just one last question not a last question, but one thing on this. Man, when I read that the Arthur Anderson, who was, as you said, just accompanying the ship, the Edmund Fitzgerald, and it gets to the safety of Whitefish Bay, and it turns around and goes back into this nightmare. Just speaks to kind of the courage. And it was almost like it's not really a decision. Like, this is what sailors do. And they went back into the storm. This one that they probably just barely survived themselves. And the courage that took to try to find, in 1 in a million chance that they would find a survivor out there.
Exactly right. And yes, you've homed in on exactly the right themes. I am very reluctant to ever criticize the Coast Guard. I know the Canadian has the Canadian version as well. For well more than a century, these guys have risked their own lives repeatedly. Heroic rescues. The Bradley and Morel, in both cases, they saved a few survivors each time. But that night, they were not ready. The 2 ships they had, search ships, were both in dock and were not prepared to go out. So that was not great. As a result, when the Arthur Anderson, the last one to have contact with the Edmund Fitzgerald, and it's a similar ship. It's 700 feet. It's carrying iron ore to Gary, Indiana, to U.S. Steel. It is not a search and rescue ship. It's an iron ore carrier. The Coast Guard asked them to go back out in 30-foot waves, 40-foot waves, to find a ship by then is gone. This captain's not stupid. That ship's not missing. It's gone. You might find 1 or 2 guys in a raft clinging for dear life, as happened with both the Bradley and the Morel. 36 hours out there on Lake Superior, freezing. And when the Coast Guard finally sent them a rope, in those cases, they were too weak to even grab the rope. That's how bad it was. But these guys went back out, and Rick Bartholomew was on that ship, a guy I got to, and he said, they didn't tell us. They didn't ask for our permission. We just felt the ship turning around. We'd not even laid anchor at that point. You feel the ship turning around, and we know what we're doing. We know it's a bad idea. We know that not only is the Fitzgerald on the bottom, we might soon be on the bottom with us in it. He said, but we didn't hesitate because the sailor's code. I said, what's that? You don't have to go. He said, we have to go out. We don't have to come back. You have to go do this because they would do it for us. And we talked to the guys in the raft who survived in 58 and 66. What kept you alive during that horrible night? And they said the idea that somewhere, somehow, there'd be a Coast Guard guy or a guy on another ship willing to risk his own life to save mine. Because you can't save my life without risking yours. And that's what kept them going. And that's why these guys went out. The slim chance of finding somebody in a raft, perhaps, and they didn't. All 29 men are with the ship at the bottom, 530 feet down. But that, I was trying to find heroes, and there are heroes. Gordon Lightfoot's a hero. Those guys going back out, and the William Clay Ford, the name for the grandson of Henry Ford, that ship went back out. The Wilfred Sykes, and have been on 2 of these ships, that went back out. The Canadian ships went out, by the way, consistently. It's the Salties that didn't go out, the ocean-going ships. The European captains who always made fun of the Great Lakes until they're on them, those guys did not go out. So the Canadians went out, the Americans went out, the European Salties did not go out. And it's got to be said also, when I wrote The Great Halifax Explosion, of course, this horrible disaster happens in Halifax, but strangers help strangers. And they came in from Moncton, they came in from New Brunswick, Toronto, Montreal, you name it, to help Boston too. And I think the reader needs that. Because after this horrible thing happens, you need to kind of rebound. In this case, I was wondering, 29 men go down, and that's it. There's no rescuing. But then I thought, you know what? It's still heroic to go out in that situation, and maybe even more heroic because you know it's a fool's mission, and you still did it anyway. So that to me is heroic, even though it produced nothing but debris, basically. It was still very noble for those guys to go out, and the Canadians did not hesitate.
Yeah, that was chilling. That sailor's code, that is just a level of, bravery and courage. It's hard to fathom.
I don't know if I'd have it. I gotta be honest. I mean,
I picture myself being in that ship and sailor's code and everything. But like you said, you're in this ship, you just barely survive. You're like, holy shit, we're actually going to make it. And then you feel this ship, you feel it turning around, and you're all looking at each other going, what's happening. You're like, okay, I guess.
You know what? And that's exactly it. You got into Whitefish Bay, and for everybody in that ship, that was the greatest storm of your life and the greatest storm you'd ever see. And you got home. You're there. You're safe. You're gonna make it. It's still nasty out there, but you're gonna be okay. And now we just saved our lives. Now we got to put our lives back on the table and throw the dice again. for a mission that's not going to produce probably any survivors. So you got it exactly right.
So maybe one last question on this, John, is, you've written books about, like you said, football and hockey, other disasters. Do you ever think about what lessons we can take away from this, that, common themes that you've hit on from the rink, from the hockey field, even the boardroom and the leadership kind of books you've written about?
Well, back to the other books. I should have tilted this up for your readers. That's Peter Mahovlich, by the way, scoring his famous shorthanded goal in 1972, Game 2 in Toronto against the Soviets for the Summit Series, naturally. Painted by Mary Steele Gare, by the way, a friend of mine in Toronto who's a great painter. But anyway, so these other books, it always boils down to leadership. In this case, McSorley was a great leader, great captain. The guys liked him so much. He was not a tyrant like so many captains at that time. Kind of like hockey coaches or bosses. 50 years ago, Bob, you could get away with a lot of things you cannot get away with now. And the other captains would throw hot coffee on you and all kinds of crazy stuff. He would not do any of that. So they followed him from ship to ship to ship as he was promoted. And they loved him so much, respected him so much. I wonder if they were not willing to push back on certain ideas. They're going full blast when they're going full speed on the way down the last leg. On the Anderson, they're supposed to go full speed, but he was not nearly as beloved, Bernie Cooper, by the engine crew. And they slowed the ship down against his wishes, risking their own jobs. Except they had found out you could be put up on charges even for openly defying a captain's orders. But they did. And as Rick Barthulli said, that might have saved our life. It probably did. Because when you're going too fast on top of everything else, that can be an issue. So leadership matters, and being too beloved can be a problem, actually. You have to have a situation where people can push back. Harry Sinden in the 1972 Summit Series, he had assistant coaches who could say, John Ferguson, the old Montreal Canadian great, I don't agree with this, and he'd listen. And you have to have that in leadership positions, especially during a crisis.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. I hadn't even thought of that. I'm going to be reflecting on that, John. I just want, in closing, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this. When I first read the book, I had folded over the corners of the pages where I came across something. I'm like, oh, I want to ask John about that. And so when I went back in preparation for this interview, I had 42 pages marked, which is probably 6 hours of questions. I whittled it down.
That's more than 10%. Yes, of the pages.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But we've hit on so many of the things that I want to talk about, and I'd like to think we've given a voice to so many of the crewmen that were on that ship, and obviously I really encourage people to get the book. The song "The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald" by Gordon Lightfoot. You can see the guitars behind me. I've played that around campfires as long as I can remember, and it's kind of so hundreds of times, and it's kind of fallen out of my usual rotation until I sort of been immersing myself back into this world. And so I picked up my guitar last week, and I'm like, oh yeah, I had to look at the lyrics because, like you said, it's got like 8 verses or something, and I had to go through it. But for the first time ever, every time I got to the line, and later that night when its lights went out of sight, came the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, I couldn't get through it without like tearing up. And that's the first time in hundreds of times playing this song that it's been that emotional, and it's because your book has just brought to life the stories of the people that were on that ship and all their families. And God, I just don't know how to thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you. That's what's kind of the goal, really, is to make them humans, not just a number, but each individual. You know them now. You know that they had bright futures ahead of them. Whether you're going to retire with your wife and your grandkids and so on, or you're going to go on this cool trip. The one story I can't resist telling here at the end. Bruce Hudson, the guy going for the road trip, he finds out in September that his girlfriend, Cindy Reynolds, is pregnant, and he's got to think fast, naturally. He finds out on a payphone at one of the sailor bars in Minnesota. And he says, okay, don't worry about it. We're going to move in together. We'll raise the child ourselves. I've got good money. We'll be okay. So she was obviously deeply relieved to hear that. And then she says, you know what? Go on your road trip anyway. It's only November. It only takes a month. The baby's not due until June. So go ahead. So at that point, he thinks she's the right girl.
Yeah.
Then, of course, the ship goes down, and Ruth Hudson has lost her only child on it. I cannot imagine the void that creates, of course, the incredible grief. And then she finds out 6 months later, Cindy Reynolds, whom she knew, the girlfriend, guess what? You're going to be a grandmother. And so she's a grandmother that spring. Heather, I've met Heather, who's now, of course, just 1 year shy of 50. We know that from the math. Heather has 4 children, and the oldest of the 4 children, Austin, looks just like Bruce Hudson. And as Aunt Ruth told her niece, Pam Wittig, she said, I love all 4 the same, of course, but I do play favorites, and Austin's it. And there you go. So these stories, I mean, there's a resurrection aspect to it, I guess. And they do live on, thanks to Gordon Lightfoot's song. They're not forgotten. And this last year certainly proved that. And the last thing I'll leave you with is Heidi Wilhelm was 12 when it happened. She lost her father. She's 6 of 7 kids. The company paid out as little as they could, in this case, 1 year's salary, basically, which, you got 7 kids. Are you kidding me? But anyway, but they grinded their way through. They became very close to other families whom they didn't know at all beforehand, because they all live in different places, Duluth, Toledo, Cleveland, and so on. They came very close, and she said, these people at this table, this is 3 years ago at Whitefish Point, where Gordon Lightfoot visited many times, by the way. That's how good a guy he was. She said, these people are not like family. They are family. Who else would know what I've been through, what it's like to be in this very odd situation? And then she says, my daughter Sarah was born on the 23rd anniversary of the sinking, November 10th, 1998, with her grandfather on it, a grandfather she'd never meet naturally. And then on her 21st birthday, on November 10th, 2019, she got a tattoo. And Heidi says to her daughter, Sarah, show John your tattoo. And she pulls up the left sleeve on her hoodie, and it says, we are holding our own. The last words, of course, from Captain McSorley. And these families really are. And this last year has been very reassuring for them that they're not forgotten. The book is a 5-time New York Times bestseller. I think it's doing very well in Canada, too. And the enthusiasm for it across North America has been more than we expected. And like you in the song spiked again last month. It is somewhat reassuring to know these guys did not die in vain. There's not been a single Great Lakes shipwreck since then. How about that? This one accident, like 9/11, like Titanic, really, woke up the industry, and the families take pride in that. So thank you for sharing this, Bob. Folks, you're loyal listeners. Bob does his homework. Bob, a real pleasure talking to you.
This has been amazing. And yes, people can pick up the Gales of November, your book on the Summit series, the Halifax Explosion, a bunch of other beauties. I can't wait to dig into the rest of them. This has just been the thrill of a lifetime, John. I can't thank you enough.
Bob, too kind. I'll come back on anytime. Thank you.
The Growth Mixtape podcast with Bob Mathers is produced by Bespoke Projects. Music by Jean-Michel Walter Cronkite. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow and rate us. When you do this, it helps to raise our podcast profile so that more people can find us. If you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn using the link in the show notes.